Scott Koegler, and I'm here at the VCF Conference for fall 2011. I'm here with Dale Rogers, Rutgers, and we're going to talk about supply chain and sustainability. So, where would you like to start with that?
We're working on a book, the Sustainability is Free, the case for the sustainable supply chain, and I think it's really an interesting time with sustainability and supply chain management. You know, it reminds me of quality back in the late 70s, early 80s. There was a book that Phil Crosby wrote called Quality is Free. I don't know if you remember that, but the argument that Mr. Crosby made is that quality doesn't actually cost you anything to build into the product and the process. And I was working at Oldsmobile in Lansing, Michigan at the time, and we were struggling to make 88s and 98s and Cutlasses that didn't have defects. Right. And I could not figure out how quality was free. It didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Flash forward about 30 years, I guess. That was about 30 years ago. And it's clear that quality actually costs you less and gains you more. So it's actually a profitable thing to build into the product. I think that's pretty obvious worldwide now. Right. Everybody knows that. I think the same thing's true with sustainability.
Okay.
I think that building in sustainability and both doing things that are environmentally friendly, and in many cases what we're talking about with the environment is actually using fewer resources. We're actually talking about cutting costs and being more productive with resources we have.
Okay.
Putting lots of constraints onto a process and saying we're going to make it cost where that probably doesn't make financial sense. It's probably not even that good for the environment in the long run. And then the other thing is being socially responsible, being ethical, and you know, doing things the right way. One of the things you want to do is treat your employees well. You know, we saw Foxconn a year and a half ago, whenever that was, have some issues with one of their plants. But you can't have a work environment that's a hopeless place where people just turn off their soul, kind of. You know, having happy employees is a good thing to have. You know, it's interesting. Jack Welch is a tough guy. Really one of the great business leaders of the 20th century, and he's still around. He's not in charge of General Electric anymore. General Electric stock was better when he was.
Yeah, right.
But he said you need to measure three things. You need to measure customer satisfaction. You need to measure employee satisfaction. And you need to measure cash flow. And if you think about making sure that your employees are engaged, you know, it's one of the lessons of the quality revolution back in the 80s was in Japan automobile plants, they were asking the people on the line, what should we do? How can we fix this? In the U.S., it was less likely to happen. The guys that had ties on were the ones that made the decision, even if they didn't really totally understand the floor. So one of the things you might not expect is, okay, how do we motivate our employees and treat them like they're part of the process, particularly if they're not even our employees, if they belong to somebody we're outsourcing from. Right. You know, if you remember the problems years ago that one of the athletic shoe companies had, you know, and they had kids working,
right.
But it wasn't their employees, it was one of their suppliers' employees. So you really need to understand what people are doing for you back in the supply chain. And that's not that easy to do. I mean, there's reasons why your suppliers might not even want you there, for one thing. And if you're an equal power to them or you're not a big company, it may be harder to make that happen. But you're going to be responsible for what happens back in the supply chain. And you need to know what it is. And having employees that aren't even part of your company, they're actually making your product and they're working for you, and you need to understand that a little bit.
Yeah. So being able to, again, be socially responsible, be sure that when you put systems, people, processes in place, that they are really doing the good thing, whatever that good thing is.
Well, and systems that work according to a set of rules, whatever the structure is,
Okay.
that are consistently adhered to a set of rules, there's less friction, and those systems works better. If you think about countries that have high corruption levels, there's a huge cost of doing business. Typically, they have much higher levels of poverty than places where there's less corruption because there's such a high cost. You need to do the right thing.
Right.
And when we have more complex supply chains, where it's not just you're making everything yourself and then you're selling it directly, but now you've got this very complex network. Structure drives behavior. Whatever the rules of the game are, and part of the rules of the game are, do we pay attention to the rules?
Right.
Whatever the rules of the game are, that determines what the outcome is.
Okay.
I think that's part of sustainability, actually, and I'm sure it's part of good supply chain management.
Part of good living.
Right, exactly. That's right. That's right.
All right, well, thanks for coming in.
Great, thanks for having me.
Appreciate the time.
Thanks.